Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio presents Catholic Mysticism, where Bielawski talks about the supernatural aspects of our faith, the saints, and other related subjects. Hey, good to have you back, Al.
Good to be back, Bob. Good evening.
Good evening. And before we get started, like you were asking me if people can still call in, yes, and the number is 515-604-9211. And the code is 914121. So you can call anytime during the program, and we'll fit you in there somewhere. If you'd like to make a comment, or you want to just share something or ask a question from Al. Okay? So, Al, where are we going tonight?
We're going to talk about why God. Why should we actually maybe follow Him or have an inkling to do what He wants in our lives? That's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Sounds good.
I was just listening to an interesting poll that stressed something that many people, I think, know deep in their heart, but may not want to admit it, and it's that educated people seem to have less of a belief in God, that they don't believe in the existence of God, and certainly then, therefore, there's no place for God in their lives is begging the question. So the question I want to ask is really, why do we want to follow God? Why do we want to believe in God? We look around us in a world, and we don't have to look so far, including our own lives, to see how much tragedy and suffering that there is. Now, each and every one of us is touched by this at some time in our lives, and some people seem to get an overload of the suffering and the tragedies. And we look at our world events, and right now, as we're speaking, where there's tensions here with Russia, and there's tensions with Korea, and it's an unstable time. We see that Venezuela has problems. And it just seems that the world is in turmoil. It seems that families are in turmoil. It seems that there is a great surplus of evil in the world and suffering. And it naturally would ask the question, then why God? If there is a God, and why isn't He up there doing something? Why isn't He changing? What is all this turmoil? Why is there so much disruption, disunity, division? And why should I follow Him? If life is going to be the same old thing and there's still going to be problems and still going to be suffering, what's the point? And for a lot of people, that is the issue. And we try to maybe anesthetize ourselves with other things like drugs or alcohol, sports, pornography, all kinds of things, all kinds of divisions and derisions that we try to seek to try to help us overcome this as a diversion so we can keep on going and kind of medicate our sufferings and the tragedies in our lives so we can function. And is that a healthy way of doing it? Probably not. But it's a way that some people cope, because we all have our coping mechanisms. Some people believe that God is a coping mechanism. Karl Marx once said, the communist, that religion is an opiate for the people. And what he meant was that those people had no power. And so the majority of people were living lives that were in desperation. And they had to have a crutch and something to hold on to. And this would be God in their religion. That's the way the communists likened it, because they knew that they had the power, and the power was not with God, the power was with them. So this isn't anything new. It goes back all the way to biblical times. And that Pew poll that I heard, when you begin to tear down and take apart a faith and the veracity of faith and the miracles of that faith and the supernatural aspect of that faith, it raises questions in people's minds and doubt. Now, all of us at one time or another have had those questions, the big ones, on the non-existence of God, of what do you do with suffering and evil. And right up front, there are no concrete answers for a lot of these higher questions. I can't give them to you, and probably no human being can. There are answers to some of them, but they're not something that we can dot the I and cross the T, and you ask a question like that, and the answer is bang, 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 and you go away satisfied. And there are reasons for this, which we're going to touch on. So, that being said, when you put a seed of doubt in people's mind, it's just the opposite of putting a seed of faith in people's mind. It can crush out that faith. What child, if it lost a parent, is prayed to the Lord, and maybe the parent does not get well from the sickness, they're praying for recovery. And certainly that can be a tremendous chink in the armor of one's faith life. When things seem to be going smooth and people working for the Lord, and all of a sudden a huge cross looms large in their lives, that can be another huge chink. And these things are going to happen, whether you're a believer or whether you're not. So, to tie this all in so we can go on, people today with an existence of God feel that God should come down, rectify all the problems that are in this world, because he can do it, and if he was a good, loving God, he would do it and take care of it. And the other equation to that is that we strip away all the supernatural aspect of a faith or a religious life, so it just becomes a mind game, a try at logic, and we equate God with what we can touch, see, and feel. Okay, so why God? Why not just, again, go about your merry way when a tragedy takes place, when a cross looms in your life, to cope with it if you can. And let me be clear about something here right now. Some can't, and there's a great danger in that. Some can't cope. Those mechanisms do not work for some people. Some people completely bottom out, ruin their lives with drugs and alcohol and combinations of, or they get involved into something so far over their head they can't come back. And in a lot of worst-case scenarios, they commit suicide. So not everybody has a coping method. And even the ones, as I mentioned earlier, we don't know how healthy they are. I'm certainly not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but we don't know how healthy it is some of these coping methods are to kind of just hold it back in, go on as if nothing happened, and continue to live our lives with that. There may be a consequence to that may come up later in our lives that we're not aware of. So, why follow God when we can have other kinds of diversions? Well, here's the thing we must realize. We have to go back to one of the premises of this show. It's called Catholic Mysticism. And that means it is a supernatural aspect of our lives, a spiritual aspect of our lives. And we have to look at it then from that realm, from the eye of eternity, and not just a materialistic view, because that's where we can get into trouble. That's where materialism and relativism have hurt the faith, because it plants great doubts in people's minds. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm against knowledge or science or education. Those things are all good. They're all gifts from God, the Creator. And they're a tool, just like anything else. A tool can be used for good, or a tool can be used to do not so good things. So I'm not against that. But what I'm saying is that we have to be careful in our aspects to gain knowledge and to gain power through that knowledge. That's the old adage, right? With knowledge comes power. That we end up going back to the Garden of Eden and committing that type of sin that got us into trouble in the first place, and that's pride. Adam and Eve wanted to be like God. And that for us as human beings, because sin is social, that's what got the ball rolling. And it certainly has snowballed. And that was the sin. They weren't happy being who they were. They broke the boundary of who they were and wanted to become God. And it's no different today. We are talking about things like cloning and possibly finding a way to create a utopia here on earth, for having life everlasting here on earth. I was just reading where I believe his name is Elon Musk, who made quite a fortune in the technology business, now is able, or working on right now, to put computer parts into an actual human being so that with the wave of your hand, you can open and close doors, purchase items, and you would be just like that old, who was it in Star Trek, Captain Picard, the half cyborg, half human. And his justification is that if you're on a plane and the pilot, say, has a heart attack and dies, they would be able to, through the computer put in you, be able to take and actually have you, through the computer in your body, land the plane safely in an airport. So, once again we see what looks like a possible good, but is it? I mean, do we want somebody controlling that? Sounds good, but what else can they control? And because we're under the yoke of original sin, can we trust ourselves with that kind of power? So we must be very careful when we're willing to give machines credence over human beings. And I'm not making this up, but a friend of mine told me they are now, for young people, giving them courses on how to actually make telephone calls with their cell phones to actually have a conversation with another human being rather than texting. So this is new, because of the technology, it's new ground we're entering, where we can dissociate from our basic skills and our basic humanity. And we must be very careful with that. We must be very careful with that. God did not design us to do this. So going back now, all that being said, when you have this type of technology, this type of education, it's very easy to go back to that sin, to the Garden of Eden, and think we're the Creator. And when we think like this, collectively as human beings, you don't need God. We are the answers to all the problems. And maybe we can have a utopia here on earth, we think, where we can create brotherhood, peace on earth, the cure for every disease, no starving people, everyone clothed, everyone having a home. But I think most of us realize that life for human beings is not like that. Because why God doesn't come down and straighten our mess out is a question people ask, and we're going to address that. When Adam and Eve had a choice to either eat from the tree of good and evil, of knowledge, they chose to give in. They chose to give in to what they wanted in their desire. And that is because they had the ability to do that because God gave them something called free will. And God respects our free will so much that He will let us do it our own way, despite the consequences. Because our free will really is a statement on how much God loves us and wants us to love Him in return freely. But that is a statement of our free will on our ingratitude and our rebelliousness as human beings. And it is continued right to this day. For a question we can ask ourselves is, where do we get the moral compass deep, deep, deep inside of us? Now we know deep in our hearts and souls that there should be no starving people, that everybody should have a fair shake, that we should love one another, that we should not be so selfish, that there should be this peace on earth, and justice should be done, and there shouldn't be acts of violence and terrorism, that families should stay together, that it should be an easier world, there should be less tragedies. And the question we need to ask is, where do we get that? Because our inclination doesn't lead toward that. We know we should do these things that are right and just, but we don't do them. And we know what is right, and we know how we would like it to be, most definitely in our own lives and families, and certainly in the world. And we can't seem to get it. We can't come up with a program or a leader or a system that gravitates us toward those ends. But we know that's how it should be. It should be back in the garden when all was idyllic. It was paradise. Why can't we have that now? And that's, if we had our ability to do this, if we set our own moral compass, for instance, in my point, we should be able to do this. We should be able to love our fellow man as ourselves. We should be able to be selfless, to feed the starving with our excess, and maybe do without ourselves so others can be helped. That we would insist upon politicians and leaders that would do right and just systems, that wouldn't infringe upon the rights of others, especially those who are powerless. So that can't come, we don't make that ourselves, our moral conscience. It comes from somewhere, and it's not in our laws. And it's not in our reason and our logic. Because if it was as simple as that, we'd probably come up with a system to make a utopia here on earth. But we can't cross that bridge. Why? Because it's that spiritual nature again. It's the supernatural and the supernatural warfare we're in. Because it is in essence a battle between the devil and evil and God and goodness. And we get our moral compass from the Creator. He has ingrained in our heart and soul what we know deep down is right and just. And we cry out to that, if we're smart, to God. Because we have to humble ourselves so that we realize there is something greater than we are. And we need that something greater. Because the answer is not us. As Pogo in those comics used to say, we have seen the enemy, and he is us. But actually our enemy is the devil. Because the devil is the one that confuses. The devil is the one that wants to take the faith of seed away. It's a parable that Christ talked about good plants being with bad weeds. And how each grows in the same area. And how the bad can strangle the good. And we have to be aware of that. Because we are called as followers of Christ to be in the world but not of the world. Now, that being said, if we can acknowledge that we're not going to have all the answers here, and throughout every epoch in man's history since the day he was here, in every pocket of this globe we call Earth, in every civilization, There has been something that has worked on human beings where even though we try to do the best we can, there will be some that will seize the power and subjugate those underneath him. No matter what system it is, no matter how hard we try, there always seems to be the powerful and then those underneath the powerful. And original sin and the nature of it, when the power goes to a certain group, they do not want to relinquish it. It is our history as human beings. Now, with that, we have to ask ourselves, how can this just be a psychological disturbance? How could this be something that's in our genetic makeup? That is something in an evolutionary process that we are going to eventually, over millions and millions of years, overcome. And when we look around, we can see all the justification for original sin. And we do not, as I mentioned earlier, have to look too far. And that supernatural force that works on us is that Satan, that adversary. Because he is known as the tempter. And God, in Scripture, called him the father of lies and the murderer from the start. And we have to recognize that. And if we do, and we look at it, as I mentioned a few moments ago, from the eye of eternity, we can start to look at a reason why God. Why should we start to follow? Why should we start to believe? Because when we look at this, one, by humbling ourselves and realizing we are not God, no matter how much we accomplish, these are gifts, and we will not become God. Contrary to what we think, we will not. There is one God, and he will not allow this to happen for our benefit. Because we don't do so well as human beings with the power we have. And who knows what would happen if we were godlike. It probably wouldn't be too pretty. So God is not going to let us usurp him. So realizing that there is something in us that calls for justice, righteousness, and in the end everything being made right, like one of the TV shows we like where the good guys win, we acknowledge that it comes from something outside of ourselves. And we're going to look at that and we're going to call it for the program God. And when we make this thought and try to build on it, we humble ourselves and just acknowledge that, okay, so if we're not God and we can't be, then is there a God? And why doesn't he straighten us out? Well, we need to look at all the order in our world. How the universe, so fine-tuned, that if the sun is a little bit off one way or the other from its alignment with the planet Earth, it doesn't come into being. It doesn't happen. That the universe, at certain moments, if these things did not all fall into place by fractions of a minutia, it doesn't happen. That the way the environment and creation and the weather and patterns and photosynthesis and all the synchronicity that we have in this world to make it right, all fine-tuned together, that's order. It's not chaotic, but it's order. And that sun comes up and it goes down, and those tides are affected, and rainfall fills the valleys, and we have drinking water, and we have life-giving air and oxygen, and all this is fine-tuned. Now, when we look at today's technology, and we look, like I mentioned, Mr. Musk, looking at these computer parts, or the cell phones, or the technology we have today to create what they call virtual reality, that requires a creator. No one would think that 747 or that intricacy of an X-ray machine that takes photos of our bones and our interior for doctors to read and make diagnosis, for the cell phone that we use, this computer, this so-called cloud, all these things, we admit, is created by someone. So we have no problem with that. We know they just didn't fall out of the sky and create themselves, that it took creation. And we have to acknowledge that the greatest things on this planet then, that the trees and the stars and the seas and the water and the animals, our eyesight, our ability to hear, our ability to move, our ability to think. These are incredible creations. The eye is awesome. We take it for granted to be able to see the colors and to read and to watch sporting events in television, to see a newborn baby, a beautiful flower, to smell it. All these sensate things we have, and they are the greatest gifts. And they didn't happen by chance. They were designed by design. And if we can acknowledge this order and see this, it will help our faith walk. Because when you go out and you look at the stars in the Milky Way, it should be humbling to hear a bird sing, or a creature like a tiger when it walks, to see those muscles go and how graceful it is, and to see the miracle of a birth of a child, or the love that a pet gives to people. These are all great, great things we need to hold on to, and they're great gifts, and they didn't happen by chance. There's something outside there greater. And this first cause, which we'll call God, has given us an ability to know Him if we choose, and to love Him. And He's given us the ability to love. And as I mentioned with Adam and Eve, He gave us free will. And we don't really do a good job, you, me, with the free will. We don't. We try. And that's actually what God wants. He wants us to try. And He knows we're going to slip and fall. But He wants us to keep trying. But we have to acknowledge Him first. And you know, when you choose Him, you're going to see things change in your life. But we'll get back to that. Because I want to go to the cross and the suffering which we must all undergo. Because, you know, it's like when the Twin Towers went down. Where was God? When the terrorists attacked, where was God? When the plane went down, where was God? When my child died, where was God? And those are probably the moments that God was closest to us, and we didn't realize it. Because we're very quick to blame Him and put the onus on Him when things go wrong. And all those nice things that I mentioned that are gifts just a moment ago, we tend to take for granted and don't think about all the good that is done here. And the Twin Towers, all the people that reached out, that helped one another, that saved lives at the expense of their own, that gave up their money to help those who were now in financial dire straits. There are those who risked out their lives wearing masks to protect them from the poisonous dust of the Twin Towers to help people out of the rubble. So there was a great deal of self-sacrifice that we saw from even other nations that came to help and support. But we don't talk about that. And the problem with our evil here is what we don't want to acknowledge is it goes back to that free will again. You see, because we have the ability to change things. We have that ability to bring about the kingdom of God on this planet. But we also have the ability to have great suffering. We look at the 20th century, you look with all the tragedies we had with World War I and World War II, with Pol Pot and the killing fields, with Mao, with Castro. Incredible century of blood and carnage, the most in human beings' history. And that's the so-called civilized world. And it wasn't too civilized. And you would think we would know better. But because of that original sin, we always have this. You look at a little bit of history and see the amount of war that man has enacted upon himself. It is mind-boggling. It has never been a time where there hasn't been something going on. And some of the world wars are local, and they're still violent. And then others, like the world wars, are extremely catastrophic. But it's our choice. You look at World War II, and because of the lust of power by Adolf Hitler, how many millions of people were affected by that to this day, as well as God's creation and creatures. They pay the price too, because we are all caught up in that sin. Remember I mentioned, it's social, and it sweeps us all. Innocent become victims through people's sin. And see, we don't talk about that. When we make decisions in our lives to commit adultery, when we know it's wrong, but we just can't overcome that desire, and we start to make excuses. Well, my wife doesn't understand me, she's never around. You hear the same excuses many times, and you justify things for yourself. We justify it so much in our free will that it doesn't even become sin anymore. We're actually now, we're at a state, in not just the United States, but in the world, where killing a baby is a legal right. Now think about that. It's a legal right to kill a child. You know, one of the things God was upset about in the Old Testament days was when they threw the children into a bonfire for crops and fertility. And he set aside Israel because he did not want child sacrifice. And we're right back to square one. He doesn't want child sacrifice. And, you know, when we have these choices that we make, we have to have a consequence. If you have a very unhealthy lifestyle and you get sick, you know, maybe you blame God and you don't look at yourself. If you become addicted to drugs for whatever the reason and you blame God to get you out of that, but he didn't put you there in the first place, and now you don't want to help yourself, it's very difficult. Or you don't want to reach out to those that could help you. Now, these addictions, whether it be cigarette, alcohol, they're very hard to break. But with God's grace, you can. But we have to do our part. We can't just put a quarter in the vending machine and think everything's going to be okay. When we trust in our own power, our own design, our own military, our own money, we're going to get into trouble. Because God is going to let us have it our way. And if one thing history has shown us, our way, sometimes, more often than not, isn't very good. A lot of people pay a high price, whether they're innocent or not. So, when those sufferings come, if we can choose God and really trust in him and realize that there is something higher and greater than us, it will open our eyes to that eye of eternity, and more importantly, our heart and soul, where we may not and don't in many cases, because I said, there's no pat answer here. You know, everybody would like that. I'd like that. Why things happen. Why bad things happen specifically. But we don't get them here. In many cases, doesn't seem there's any answer. And that's where that humbleness in us can help in choosing God. Because when you choose God, it doesn't mean an absence from those crosses. You look at the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and if anybody was innocent and should have had it made, it was them. And they didn't have it easy. They had to get up with Mary with child and go on a donkey to have the child where there was no room for them. They had to flee and come back when Herod, who sought the life of the child to kill him, when he died, they were able to come back. Think about this. Moving back and forth and back. Not easy. Not in an air-conditioned automobile. Not in an airplane, but walking and on a burro in a land filled with dangers, with the harshness of the environment, with bandits, with the wild animals, and a hardened world. That's why Christ came into the world, because men's hearts had grown cold, as Archbishop Fulton Sheen said. So they didn't have it easy. And then somewhere along the line, Joseph died, and Mary was widowed, And it was her and Jesus. And they lived a very, very common, poor life. They didn't have extravagance. They didn't have riches or wealth. They struggled. They struggled. And as we know, Christ was killed on a cross. So if they didn't have it easy, why would we think we would have it easy? Because this is, again, that battle, and it's an important one, because at the end of the game is where we're going to be forever. And the years we get in life, no matter how few or how long, will pale in comparison to that. So when we follow Christ and choose God, we see a way that is a healthy way to cope with the troubles and crosses in our lives. Because, brothers and sisters, we begin to see maybe there is a reason, and maybe I won't understand it here. But because I am a humble creature of the Creator, and I do believe that He loves me and has only good for me in His heart, that He will somehow take this wrong and He will make it right. And if not in this life, the next. And that is a nice cushion to have, folks. Because it takes the pressure off our shoulders to come up with answers and rattle our brains on that why. Because it teaches us something that is difficult for each and every one of us, for me, for you, for everyone listening, and that is to let go. To let that control that we seek for, to control events and everything in our lives and everything in the world, to let it go. And just to say, I trust you, Lord. And just to give your heart to Him and let Him go from there and work from there. And there is a certain peace that comes from that, brothers and sisters. And a joy too. Now, I'm not saying when bad things happen, people aren't sad. And they have to deal with it. And it's going to be a rosy picture. Because that's unrealistic. That's not real. We know this. But that joy I'm talking about is a joy that the peace you get in your heart, that Christ will give you. The ability to forget. The ability to forgive. The ability to move on. The ability to see joy and laugh again. The ability to trust when you've been betrayed. And the ability to hope. Without human beings cannot survive without hope. And that's what He gives us, the hope. And that's what we need so we don't turn to the destructive patterns that we seek to cope, to anesthetize us, to get us through when these things happen. Because now you know in your heart and soul that there is something better. That you have someone that loves you. And you know, God is taking care of all this in His magnificence and His design. You know, for those who have had a father wound, whose father maybe abandoned them or abused them or mistreated them in any way, and they can't reconcile a loving and kind father. Well, God has given the Virgin Mary for a place for people to go where they may feel more nurtured in the arms of a mother. And He has given brothers and sisters in the saints that we can pray to and seek consolation with. And Jesus will put people and things in our lives that will help us to take our hearts that are stone cold and harden as stone and break them if we let them through our free will. But we have to acknowledge that. And that is better than any drug. It's better than any alcohol. It's better than anything we could throw ourselves, than the pursuit of money, you name it. It gives you a sense of peace and a sense of belonging and a sense of real reality. Because in that conscience, in that heart and soul that we all have, that were created by God, it starts to fill. And we start to make decisions not based on a punishment of a fear of going to hell or having the bomb drop on us because we angered God and the wrath of God will come upon us. It will become, for us, over a period of time, an act of love that builds, not in punishment, but because we don't want to offend the one that we love by hurting them. Just like here in our family. For those we truly love, it's not about being punished if a child disobeys its parents. It's about we hurt and we broke some trust there. And they counted on us and we let them down. That's the kind of hurt I'm talking about when we do and break one of God's commandments and sin. It's not the punishment now as we begin to grow. It's that we don't want to hurt the one we love. And what that does is enable us to do and choose better decisions in our life. And it turns us away from sin. So before maybe we pick up that TV remote or that cell phone, we're going to look at some pornographic pictures. We say, no. God wouldn't like that. He wouldn't want that for me. And maybe when we were going to have an opportunity for the company we work to doctor a book because, darn it, we're short this month on money for bills and my kids need this. No, that's not right. He goes, no, God wouldn't like that. He's blessed me. I don't want to hurt him. That's the kind of growth, slowly but surely, that changes individual lives. And that's the kind of growth when we have those individual lives change, that can change the world. And it's a process, and we're going to slip. But when you follow God, it's not like when you fall off, say you decided to quit smoking, and you do good for a while, and then for some circumstance you come back and start smoking again, and then you're going to continuously chain smoke because, doggone it, what's the use? I fell. I might as well go at it wholeheartedly now. And we start to do things like that. It's not like that when we follow God. He'll give us the grace we need, especially if we're Catholic and we have that beautiful sacrament of confession to go to. He'll give us that grace we need to choose Him more and more and more. And that's going to do wonderful things in your life because it's going to give you the steel in your lives and that we need to face those crosses. And maybe at one point to say, yes, I'm suffering so, Lord, but use this. Use this suffering of mine. Don't let it go to waste. Don't let it just be suffering for the sake of suffering. Let it have some benefit for some soul out there. If not for me and my family, for someone, please. And you cry out to Him. And in His mercy, He will hear you. Because that's another thing we get when we follow God. And we want to say, why God? Mercy. And the more mercy that we show, the more in our lives you will receive. Because God's greatest attribute is that mercy. Even when they sinned in the Garden of Eden, God was still concerned about them. He clothed Adam and Eve when they were worried about their nakedness. And when Cain committed the first murder, he was worried that he would be killed, but God marked him so he would not be. And the big one, He made a new covenant with Noah after Adam and Eve fell and gave them the same. He gave Noah the same commandment. Be fruitful, multiply, and be good stewards of the earth. So He started a new covenant with Noah that everyone would have the benefit through Christ. So that's a loving God. So no matter how far we slip or how bad we stray, He was always waiting there with His arms open, willingly taking us in just with love. And that's a great thing to have in your soul. That's a great thing to have in your soul. Because once we humble ourselves again, we're not going to start to ask so much why. We're going to have more acceptance. But it's a real acceptance. It's not just the old, well, that's life. That's how life is. And we get the ball rolling again. No, this is a different kind of acceptance. It's an acceptance in our lives, in our hearts and soul, that this will all work out. That God, who writes straight lines with crooked ones, will make this right. And we can count on that promise because God does not break promises. And if He makes a promise, He keeps the promise. And we can count on that. And that's going to give us what we need to carry on in a healthy way. Because we begin to realize that spiritual aspect of our lives. And we begin to step outside of ourselves in just what we need for our own survival. Just what we need for our basic needs of food, water, and shelter. To step out of survival of the fittest. And to do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. And that's where it really starts to work. Because when we follow Christ and make that decision to love one another as He has loved us, it might be something like volunteering for a soup kitchen, whether you're 10 years old or whether you're 80. And a thing starts to happen to you when you start to serve. You find you get the benefits and graces more than the people you're serving. It is really something how that works. You are elevated by this. And you can see this, and it gives you a joy that's indescribable. And to help another person. Because, that's a successful life. Don't let the modern world tell you it's about getting on television and writing books and making money and being famous. It is about the one time in your life that you reach down and grab someone's hand that was in that mire of muck and trouble and despair, and you lift them out. And they got their lives going again. And God worked through you, and they saw God working in you. And it may be the first time they've ever seen that. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a successful life. Don't let anyone do. Because some of the smallest things we do, I am convinced, bring the loudest cheers in heaven. And the things that we don't think are so grand in heaven. And one day we'll know. And that brings us to another point. Right now I've talked about why you want to choose God here on earth. Because of these benefits that are for you and for me by following Christ. Because it will change our lives. That's a reason, too, people don't want to follow God. Because when you follow God, you have to change. It can't be the same old, same old. And you see this. And including me, none of us like change. We don't. We like the status quo. And that includes all animals, too. Animals do not like, if in the woods, when you disrupt an animal's normal procedure, they get very anxious. And you can see the anxiety in them. They don't like it. And we don't either. And that's why it's hard for us and for some people to accept God, because God asks us to change. He asks us to grow closer to Him and closer to His creation. You and me, the animals, and all of creation. And that's a big responsibility. It's easy to justify our laziness. I do it all the time. And not to choose a better path. It's easy. Piece of cake. Hard part's to step out of ourselves. That requires work. But and I know that anything worthwhile in life is working hard for it. That's the nuts and bolts of life. That the most rewarding things are the ones we have to work hard. I remember when I was for my black belt, and we trained so hard and so long, and it was really nerve-wracking. Because when you go on to a test with a board of your peers, it's dead quiet. And you have to run your forms or kata in front of all the people. And it's just you and all eyes on you. And then you have to do the rest of your stuff with the other people. All your self-defense techniques, everything you need. And it's hard to put yourself on a line like that because these peers that you respect and want their approval to get that rank either tell you that day you're good enough or you're not good enough. It's as simple as that. And you know what? It doesn't get any harder than that for us as human beings to know that we're either good enough or not good enough. Accepted or rejected. That's tough. That's tough. But that's the kind of things that build that intestinal fortitude when those crosses and sufferings come in our lives, when we hang on to God, that carry us through, that we not only get through, but could make something with God's help good out of it. And write that straight line with a crooked line, especially when we didn't want that crooked line in our lives. And it gives us a sense of purpose and a focus. And it gives us, if we're in tune to our spiritual side, empathy for people that we meet that will need our help. Remember what I mentioned about the successful life. Because when you're willing to be God's feet and hands, like St. Simon of Cyrene, who helped Jesus carry that cross, he's going to send people in your life with those crosses because you've been there to help them carry theirs. And that is going to be an incredible thing for you to do. You are going to have so much joy helping people out because you've been there and you know the agony. And I'm not talking about great things. I'm talking about someone that's desperate, just giving you a call. And because you've been through that cross, you not only have the ability to listen and to empathize, but to possibly, through the grace of the Holy Spirit, to have what they need to hear or to do what they need done in their lives. And you can help them. And you know that means that they can help people too the next time they run into somebody that dealt with the very cross that they came to you with, that you dealt with. And that's how we build this kingdom upon each other, by reaching out in that empathy. And it's tough because you've had to pay your dues, as they say. But you have credibility, and you have that fortitude, and you have the wisdom of the Spirit. And you see, when you have that, when you follow God, you have that wisdom of the Holy Spirit. And the people, spiritually, they can home in and zoom in on this because they can see it in your spirit. And it works both ways. And you'll be able to tell in their spirit. Because in the end result, like I mentioned, we're spiritual beings. So this is one of the reasons, and a big one, we want to choose and say yes. Why God? Because God gives us the order in our lives. God gives us the peace. God gives us the joy. He gives us the compassion of our brothers and sisters. He gives us to love when it doesn't seem there's anything left in our heart. He gives us the hope when all hope seems gone. He gives us that joy and laughter which we thought will never come back in our lives again. He gives us a reason to hold on when everything is crumbling upon us. He is there to help carry our cross when we are betrayed by those whom we put our trust the most. He can send his mother to wipe away our tears if that's what one needs. And he works through other people to help us with our crosses. And he gives us the ability to see the goodness in the world and in each other. No matter how dark, he will give us by opening up our spirit to see the light. And once we see the light, we will move toward it. And we will not give up. And we will not lose that hope. And no matter what the devil throws at us, we will overcome. Because we will have the power of the angels and the power of the saints, the power of heaven itself to help us in this battle. Because that's, again, what it is. That's who tries to undermine the faith with whatever tool he can. The father of lies tries to take evil and make it look good in a pretty package. So we accept the evil. And we can't see clearly. And we're in a fog. And that's one of the reasons there's so much confusion. Because when we want to decide what is good and evil for ourselves, when we want to, in essence, be God and take his place, we're not made for that job. We're not equipped for that job. And therefore we will be confused because it's out of our job spec, so to speak. And not good things will happen. And that is the devil's intent. Make no mistake about it. The devil has our destruction in mind, period. He is a friend to no one. He wants our destruction. And he's very crafty. And he knows the weaknesses when we are tempted. But the good news of that gospel is Christ and the resurrection. And Christ gives us the strength by turning toward him not to give in. It takes some will and some strength on our part. But we can do it, brothers and sisters. We can do it. There are many people that have had that testimony of turning from the evil and coming to the good, to embracing the light. And there are many books and tapes and stories and programs you can watch. EWTN is a great network that runs a lot of these specials. There are many of them. And it edifies us to look at that good. You know, one small way we can try to do that is focus on the good. Focus on the good. Hard to do in today's world, in today's media picture, but there's a lot of good out there. There's a lot of good out there. And what I would suggest too, since this is a supernatural battle, become like a little child again. And believe in miracles. Don't let everybody say, oh, poo-poo, this is this because of this scientific reason. We can prove this. There's a lot we can't prove. There's a lot we don't know. I was just reading a story the other day that there was a Muslim man that became a Christian, and he does a lot of tremendous work out in the Middle East. He goes out, helps with the Christians that have been displaced. Tremendous guy. And he got attacked. He got attacked by some Muslim terrorists, and they beat him up pretty bad, and he was severely injured, and he was recuperating in a house with a woman that was 80, several children under 4, and a woman with child. And the terrorists came and found out where he was, and they started coming to the house armed with weapons and pipes. And he was doing, I believe it was his last day, his 21st day of a prayer and fast he was doing. And they all in the house agreed, this is it. You know, there's nothing we can do to stop him. This is our last day on earth. As one of the terrorists approached the house and got closer, a lion came out of the brush and grabbed him. Now, the terrorist buddies tried to help him out. Another lion jumped out of the bush and took off. And they made it. They survived. And here's the thing. There's no lions in that territory. So when you hear stories like this, just don't throw them out the door. Think about that. There's miracles every day, big and small. And those big ones, don't let people try to say you're naive and that they don't happen, because they do happen. There's Eucharistic miracles, and there's the miracle of Lazarus in the tomb. There's the miracle, the big one, Jesus rising from the dead and conquering death. That's right. Following Christ, that's the big payoff, so to speak. At the end of our life. We're out of time, Mel. We're out of time. What a show. What a great show. Great inspiration. Thank you very much, Al. All right, Bob. On Catholic Mysticism, we'll be back next week again. Same time, same station. In the meantime, may God bless each and every one of you. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.